from the Asia Pacific Indigenous Tourism Conference. My name is Ben Sherman. I am the chairman of WINTA, the World Indigenous Tourism Alliance, and we are one of the sponsors of this event. This session is going to cover two different topics, and one of them is the Larrakia Declaration that we developed in the year 2012 at the first Pacific Asia Indigenous Tourism Conference, and that has since been adopted by the United Nations World Tourism Organization. We will tell you more about the Larrakia Declaration with another speaker that will be joining us. But for now, we're going to go into a session that discusses the proposed declaration from WINTA of the Indigenous Research Declaration. This started with discussions among the participants, the proposed participants in a summit in Australia that was never held. It was canceled because of the pandemic. So we let it rest for a while, and then when we planned this conference, we brought it up again, and we pulled together some of the original panelists who developed the declaration for Australia and brought it forward here to Chile. And it has been updated since then. And let me say this about the declaration. We would like to have it emerge from this conference as an outcome of the conference. So therefore, we will need your comments, those of you who wish to make comments. And we'll invite those comments later on and tell you more about how to transmit those comments. But for now, I would like to introduce you to our session leader, Mr. Damien Jacobson, who has an Indigenous heritage in Australia. He has been involved in the academic world for 20 years or more. He is one of the original authors of this declaration that is being proposed today. So, Damien, with no further ado, here's Damien.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Ben. Welcome everyone to today's session. I'm joining you from Australia, in particular Kombumerri Yugambeh country, which is in Queensland. Myself, I'm a Bulkanwara Aboriginal person, and I'm quite proud to be able to present to you today. I'm just going to share my screen so we can go through the slideshow of the presentation, and hopefully that's come up. Maybe I have to put it in the big screen there. Nope, that's not it.
It looks good, Damien.
You can see it, Ben? Excellent.
Not now. I can't see it now. There it is.
There it is. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. So let's just give you a little bit of background of how these declarations and recommendations evolved. It came out of the recommendations of sustainable development of Indigenous tourism that was endorsed by the United Nations World Tourism Organization back in September 2019. It's a publicly available document. You can see it there on the left of the screen. There's a link there as well, so I urge you to download a copy. It covers lots of guidelines and principles on sustainable engagement. There's recommendations for tourists. There's recommendations for tour operators. There's recommendations for Indigenous people as well. As part of this document, it also highlighted the importance of research for Indigenous tourism, and in particular the passage that's of note is that it has become evident that the development of an Indigenous tourism cannot be undertaken without sound partnerships among Indigenous communities, governments, tourism destinations, the private sector, and civil society. Moreover, academic institutions need to partner with these stakeholders in order to be able to produce solid research and data to be used in the course of the tourism development. So yeah, this role of academia then to the progress of sustainable Indigenous tourism is quite important. Now, WINTA identified that there's a little bit of gap then in sort of providing a bit of framework around what this kind of engagement can mean. So with the assistance of some Indigenous and non-Indigenous tourism researchers, they produced the draft statement of declaration and recommendations on tourism research that we're going to present today. And this has all come about with quite a bit of a story, and I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the people who are involved in putting these declarations together. So it started off back in August 2019 with the steering group. Their objective was to draft the declarations and recommendations. Now this was headed up by late Johnny Edmonds, who pulled us all together. And we had a team that included Anna, Appy, Michael, Freya, and also Beverly as well. So I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the group and all the work they put together. By October, we'd produced a pretty good draft that was ready to distribute to experts and people involved in Indigenous tourism. So these included quite a wide range of people, such as the stakeholders that were consulted by the World Committee on Tourism Ethics, people who were involved in the World Indigenous Tourism Summit back in 2018, Indigenous tourism leaders, Indigenous controlled and led tourism associations and bodies. It also included universities that are leading the way in tourism research, ethical consultants, non-government, non-profits, specialist government-initiated organisations, and also the WINTA Global Network. So we received quite a lot of feedback from all these different parties, and I'd like to take the opportunity to also thank those today for their contributions. Now, as Ben mentioned, our aim was to present at the World Indigenous Tourism Symposium in 2020. But yeah, this wasn't to be, and here we are today. Now, the presentation today will be the declarations. The paper is a two-part piece, and it includes the declarations and all the recommendations. The reason we're just presenting the declarations today is that there's still a few more stages we have to go through to final approval. So after the conference today, it's got to go to the UNWTO for further review and approval. And finally, after that, this document will finish its journey back with WINTA. We'll have final approval for subsequent worldwide distribution. So, the declarations. It's my great pleasure to run through them with you today. The WINTA declarations on tourism research includes the following. So first is that Indigenous communities have worldviews and links to traditional lands and ocean spaces that represent unique and diverse cultural expressions. These cultural expressions provide a clear attractor for visitors seeking to experience different geographic locations and their Indigenous communities. Number two, institutions with research capability in tourism have an important role to play in advancing tourism research to contribute to the understanding of visitor markets and generate knowledge consistent with and contributing to the requirements of Indigenous data sovereignty and Indigenous data governments. Declaration number three is that Indigenous natural and cultural heritage, including Indigenous knowledge systems, have been impacted for centuries by colonizations and further threatened by global developments, including tourism. Declaration number four, Indigenous peoples have demonstrated that given the opportunity to fully participate in development processes, they can share valuable worldviews, initiate adaptive responses to cope with external influences, and produce tourism opportunities which benefit both visitors and their own communities. Declaration number five is that the evolution of advocacy protecting the rights of Indigenous peoples, including their knowledge systems, has been accelerated by states and the corporate sector, including the tourism industry. And finally, there is an increasing recognition of Indigenous peoples' knowledge and the requirements for Indigenous data sovereignty and Indigenous data governments. So these 6 principles, they lay the groundwork and the setting for the recommendations themselves. Until we distribute the full declaration and recommendations, I'd like to leave you with a few things to remember. First is that the challenges that we Indigenous people face are quite significant. Yet, in the face of those challenges, our spirits remain very, very strong. Now more than ever, we need the research community to walk together, not to walk in front of us, but walk together side by side with Indigenous people in the pursuit of knowledge to move forward. Also, please remember that Indigenous people need knowledge and solutions for today and for tomorrow. So it has to be relevant and adaptive to our needs. And researchers also have to remember that they are also part of the change as well. So researchers are people carrying out, their research and their representatives of their universities. So they too must be the change that we'd like to see, and to be part of that change, to practice things like listening, taking the time to understand, taking the time also to reflect on your research practices, and then emanate that sense of respect. And finally, the research community must embrace Indigenous worldviews, Indigenous practices, and work towards what we'd like to see as real change, and also to enable indigenous empowerment. So thank you very much for being with me today, and I'll now hand you back over.
Thank you very much, Damien. I appreciate that, going through that. Okay, now we're going to introduce you to our panelists and their comments. Let's start with Brother Pedro. Are you ready, Pedro?
Yes, indeed.
Please.
Hello, Ben. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes. Right. Well, first, Ben, I would like very much to thank you and the organizing committee for inviting me to this panel and make some comments on the declaration and recommendations about indigenous tourism research. We certainly understand that this indigenous tourism is an important endeavor, as was just referred by Damien, to guide projects that respect indigenous tourism protocols and rights, and certainly offering benefits to indigenous people. That's really one of the major focus, I would say, to embrace the indigenous perspectives and worldviews linked to the traditional landscape, oceans and spaces that represent the unique and diverse, I would say, cultural expressions among many other aspects. And I would like to start as a research university commenting how do we receive this and how do we react upon this. I would like first to refer to the complex problems that we need to tackle today. And these complex problems of the pandemic, we can clearly state that we really need different perspectives and viewpoints to really tackle them adequately. So a single viewpoint and perspective is not enough, talking about a wide range of perspective. And particularly with respect to tourism, these approaches need to be developed in order to be able to organize and to design adaptive responses to cope with external influences and produce tourism opportunities which can visit and benefit our visitors, but also, of course, the communities. And I would like to highlight in a sustainable way, which is a major challenge. So keeping these challenges in mind, I believe that a major goal or challenge as well consists on the venues that may be open through this co-construction. And I highlight this term, co-construction, and how we as research institutions, we may foster this integration, particularly with respect to the research that is developed with a clear involvement of indigenous communities, embracing their wide knowledge, and I would say sustainable equilibrium that they have maintained through centuries, where the value of nature and the understanding of the present, of the here and now, play pivotal roles, as well as the treasure to integrate their methodologies and approaches, or even more interesting, the other way around, that they can integrate our academic knowledge and approaches to their paradigms. That would be beautiful. And we are in a critical moment in our country and our world where we are increasing awareness. And I would say, at least from my perspective, what is happening in our country, in my country, is that we are increasing pride of these values. So we are in a particular moment. We feel proud about our nature, I would say. It's not an easy task, I would say, and we must be very honest on that. But I think that the majority of the population is feeling really proud about this value. And this is beautiful and it's quite novel. And as a university, we need to define strategies and we need to design these strategies to accomplish these goals. And we need to frame, first of all, the challenges in a collaborative way. We first need to start framing, and in this particular domain, addressing sustainable tourism. But I think the co-construction, the collaborative construction in framing what are the goals that we're going to target are very critical. And certainly we need to include instruments, subsidies, networking, and most important, as we're experiencing now, conversations to generate actions. Among these platforms, I would like to highlight, and I finish with this, some refer to what we have done as a university, because I think that this platform that can be maintained and sustained through times are critical. At UC, for instance, we have a campus in Villarrica, where the most important part of our indigenous population is located, which embraces this intercultural perspective from their birth during 4 decades. Also, we have for almost 10 years, a center of excellence that was being able to establish thanks to the sponsorship of the government on intercultural and indigenous studies, CIR, which is organizing this seminar together with other members, certainly, and that develops research with an interdisciplinary perspective and clear integration through a dialogue with respect to cultural diversity, and most importantly with finance, which is needed to develop this research. And recently we have created the Council for Interculturality in our university, which seeks establishing an institutional policy within the university, inducing a cultural change, which targets increasing the critical mass of students at under and postgraduate level from diverse different cultures and certainly including indigenous population. We also need to increase the diversity in our academic body. That is a very important target. And most important, we need to promote actively research pathways in indigenous population to really ignite their desire and ambition to develop research on their own together with the remaining members of the community, to increase their critical mass within the institutions. And I think that's very, very important. And it starts from the selection process at undergrad level towards the different paths that we can certainly help them to develop. So
Pedro,
major challenges, but these were some of the ideas that I wanted to share. Thank you, Ben.
okay, thank you very much. We're short on time because we started late this session. So I'm going to quickly introduce Sister Carolina Debiens. You're on, Caroline.
You are mute, Caroline.
Caroline. Caroline, are you with us? We may have lost her. Pedro or Jean-Philippe, do you know? Or Miss
Yes.
Melissa? Well, I would like to move ahead to Chris Bottrell so we don't have further delays. Chris is a professor in a significant position at Capilano University in Canada, and he was a tremendous help to us in the early days of the Larakia Declaration. So I will get right on to you, Chris. You're on.
Okay, thank you so much, Ben. And a pleasure to be with everybody today. As Ben mentioned, I'm up at Capilano University, and we're on the unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish nations and Liwot nations. So, but today I happen to be down in Nevada, So I guess this is the Paiute Nation here, the traditional territory. So anyway, I wanted to thank you, Ben. I'll be concise and just give a little background to some work that we did back in 2015. Sound okay, Ben? Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. I will move through quickly, so you'll see some slides, but I'm going to move fast. So I'll just show this now.
Very good.
Just go back up to the start here. Okay, so I was very fortunate to work with Johnny Edmonds and Ben and several others on some work that we back in 2015. And this was really built on the Larrakia Declaration. And at the time, what we were interested to do was to look at the relationship of the Larrakia Declaration with human rights in the context of Indigenous tourism development. It was a project that we did with WINTA and PATA and a few other partners as well. And PATA, in case just to remind you all, is the Pacific Asia Travel Association. I was the chair of PATA for 2.5 years. My term just ended a little while ago. So again, it was looking at UNDRIP, aligning UNDRIP with the Larrakia Declaration, and then creating some practical tools for implementation to actually see how we could implement the Larrakia Declaration and align that with UNDRIP, so therefore protect human rights in Indigenous tourism development. You're all very familiar, I know, with the Larrakia Declaration. I don't need to go into that, but what I will talk about is how we compressed it and we found this alignment. So what we did is we looked at themes that were in UNDRIP and how they aligned with themes, principal themes in the six elements of the Larrakia Declaration. And these were, the first one was looking at, for example, Articles 1, 2, and 7 of UNDRIP and how they related to autonomy, identity, and freedom, and then how that related to respect in the context of the Larrakia Declaration, which is really the essence of the first one. We used a few other themes in there as well, but that was the essence of this. So we've narrowed it down to 6 themes. And we looked at cases all around the world, and we looked at some really awful cases, frankly, where human rights had been impaired and abused for many, many years. This is the Moken people of the Andaman Sea. Then we saw some really other interesting cases on the other spectrum, and this is the Tulalip tribes in Washington State, actually just south of where we live and work up in Vancouver in Canada. So these are the cases, and I'm going to be fairly move through these quickly. So we looked at the Moken Sea Gypsies in the Andaman Sea, Kain Longneck tribes in Myanmar, the Black Hmong in Vietnam, Gunya Tijgala in South Australia. We looked at the conservation estate, and particularly the Ngāi Tahu of New Zealand, and the relationship of the Land and Policy and Resource Management Act and things like that. Again, Tulalip tribes up in Washington State. A case in 2 cases actually in Canada. One was the Soyuz Nation, very interesting nation. It's very, very progressive in tourism and in other elements. Run a terrific winery up there, but as well. And the Inuvik and Western Arctic nations of way up in the north in the edge of the Arctic. This gave us a really strong cross-section to draw in on the Larrakia themes, and then again looking at the relationship to UNDRIP. Now we gathered a few insights. I'm going to be very brief on this. Some of the insights were things like greater intrinsic value for community and nation building happened where there was Indigenous cultural protection. When you reevaluate power relations, things change, and that's just coming with a new blank slate and trying to understand this key essence of collaboration, of course. where there was a lack of terrestrial identity, negative impacts resulted. That was particularly the case for the Mokans. Where capacity building was a key component there, and education was a key component, that made an enormous difference to the protection of human rights. And by that we mean education and so on. And the last two themes there were on was on language. Now my slides are moving quickly. So here's where we looked at the first one. This is when we look at the Larrakia Declaration principle. It was respect. We looked at the first one, and the key essence is respect for customary law, land and water, traditional knowledge, traditional cultural expressions, cultural heritage that will underpin all tourism decisions. So that was kind of the essence of the first of the Larrakia Declaration principles. Then we aligned it with UNDRIP principles, and then what we did is, in this chart you can see there, we looked at the responsibility of the community, the responsibility of operators, the responsibility of the public sector, and the responsibility of NGOs to acknowledge and uphold each one of the elements that transpired from the principle, the Larrakia Declaration principle, and the UNDRIP-related articles. So this first example here is where we would look at, again, this is on respect, and so we'd look at the key articles there, which were not to be subjected to forced assimilation, destruction of culture, full enjoyment as collective or as an individual, free and equal to all other peoples and individuals, liberty and security of person. And then just this little example here, our first question would be, have all participants read the Larrakia Declaration principles and committed to them?
Chris,
yeah.
Excuse me, but we're going to have to wind it up now.
Okay, so I will conclude. As you can see, each one of these checklists exist, and it gave us a way of actually operationalizing the Larrakia Declaration and aligning that so that human rights were not infracted. So thank you for allowing me the time again, Ben. If there is any further questions or anybody would like to receive that, then by all means do so.
Thank you very much, Chris. I apologize for the time limitations.
Not at all. Thank you.
Okay. Well, next we will introduce Caroline Debiens, and if she is ready, you're on now.
Yes, I'm so sorry. My computer just crashed specifically at the moment I was.
Well, let's proceed quickly through then.
Yeah. Well, I guess I have to go quickly. I'm speaking from Quebec City, which is the land of the Wendat, Innu, Wabanaki, and Wolastoqiyik peoples. And I wanted to bring to this discussion the specific context we're undergoing here in Canada, which has to do with truth and reconciliation, and is also cultural resurgence. This is a context which really impacts, from my perspective, the work that we do collaboratively with Indigenous peoples to support the tourism sector. As some of you may be aware, Canada is undergoing a very important moment of reckoning following the discovery just last June of hundreds of unmarked graves of children who died while in residential schools. And, you know, this may seem quite distant from the tourism sector, but one very important factor to take into consideration, which we try to do in our research, is that the children that were sent to residential schools were separated from their families and from their cultures, but also from their territories. So, of course, this is a very dark episode of history in Canada. And following a public inquiry, the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation was held just last week on September 30th. So in relation to tourism, because of that separation from territory, for some communities, bringing back a land-based cultural tourism does bring up sometimes some of the challenges that are linked to that colonial context where people were separated from their traditional lands. So in relationship to the WINTA Declaration and the Larakia Declaration, in Canada and in Quebec, we have pretty strong research protocols that set out principles of collaborative research. But how do we deal with this extra, I would say, like concern, this process of truth and reconciliation that is undergoing in Canada right now? So I wanted to bring up just 3 points before I conclude. For the research that I do with the Innu community of Pessamit on the North Shore, we've really been questioning in that context of separation from the territory, what does authenticity mean and how is it modulated by the colonial context? And people really want to ask questions about that in order to create better tourism experiences that incorporate the full spectrum of this relationship to the land. A second point is that we have to meet collectively in our collaborative research, we have to meet cultural knowledge where it is at this particular moment of truth and reconciliation in Canada. And if we do that well, I think we have better leverage for a better approach to developing cultural tourism experiences that are land-based. And the last thing I would say is that as university, I'm a settler, university professor. So I find that we really have to do the footwork from within what are very often colonial institutions. We have to do the footwork to use our contacts and think creatively to bring as many resources as we can find to support the resurgence of the cultural heritage that is such a great asset for tourism development, for relationship building, and also for reconciliation more broadly. So I'm sorry for the glitch, the technical glitch here. I had to really race through what was a carefully prepared presentation with all the thank yous involved, but I don't want to end this without saying thank you to my research partners in Pessamit, without whom any of this insight would not be possible. And thank you to the organizers again, and I extend my gratitude to all of you for listening to these quick remarks. Miigwech, Tinashkumit now, and merci.
Thank you. It's good to see your smiling face, Caroline. I would like to make a final comment, and it has to do with research that was conducted in Canada by Beverly O'Neill several years ago. And you probably are aware, Caroline, that Beverly put together this tremendous report about the research that was done all across Canada. And when the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada came into being, they had an excellent report to begin with that demonstrated the capability and credibility of Indigenous tourism across Canada. And that allowed ITAC to make more rapid strides in getting government support, provincial support, and other industry support, and to collect funds to get the association up and running. So thank you, Beverly O'Neill, if you're listening. ITAC has become a model Indigenous Tourism Association worldwide. And that's my last comment, next to last comment. Please respond to the declaration points that we submitted. We want to keep them brief as possible so that they can be adapted to any location in the world. So send your emails to Jean-Philippe Lemoyne at winta.org. And with that, that's the end of our session. And again, I thank you all very much for your very good comments. Okay, take care, folks.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you.